This is chapter 33 of the Landscape and Corridor Beautification chapter. Note that we changed the title to focus a little bit more on the landscaping. There are a few changes to this chapter. If you go to 1033-2C, which is on page 1, we'll scroll down to that. It states that their landscape plans need to be designed by a landscape architect or a landscape designer. We're seeing too many landscape plans come in that are substandard, and they're really not specifying trees or how to plant the trees, the specifications and all that. And so somebody's coming in and plopping a tree in the ground, and we're seeing a lot of those die out because they're not treated properly. So it's both application as well as a design that we're struggling with. So we've increased that requirement. If you go to page 2 on this to 1033-2D, you'll note here that there have been some changes. We added the GB2 zoning district to this. That will now be required to have street trees. We've also changed these requirements for any multifamily development. Within the development, there needs to be one tree for every 1,000 square feet of unpaved landscape area. This was a little confusing the way we had it worded before because it included parking lots. So this removes that changes that requirement and removes parking lots from that equation. Also in D3, as we had mentioned before, we're going to 1.5-inch caliber trees instead of 2-inch, simply because of availability and cost for the developers. And there's just much more available for the 1.5-inch caliber. The city forester has okayed that, and we really get the same effect as we do from one or the other. Also, there's a reference to chapter 5 here in D4. Title 5, excuse me, not chapter 5, Title 5 is the code that's used by the city forester for all tree trimming and planting. So we have specified that they need to follow that Title 5 when they plant trees. In terms of a new requirement, we're looking now at shrubs. Again, we've had a lot of problems with this. We haven't really reviewed shrubs or inspected them very much. And so we're requiring that shrubs be selected from for species that do well in this area, and that they need to be in good health at the time that the plants are planted. We also have some separation from turf areas that need to be enforced. We've had some contractors who, again, didn't know what they were doing, or builders, and they put the shrubs in the ground and then they ran turf all the way up to the base of the shrub. So eventually they're either going to mow over the top of that shrub, or they're going to have to remove that shrub because it's just not going to be compatible. So we have a little bit more detail here about that. In 1033-2F, note here at the bottom, it says maintenance of street trees shall be completed by a licensed city contractor. That again is per the requirements of Title 5. We don't want residents out there hacking away at trees who really don't know what they're doing. So we're going to have to require that be done by a contractor. In 1033-2K, I'm going to scroll down here. That's on page 4. So here, this clarifies the street tree planting in the downtown area. The original code said that impervious surfaces shall be maintained to the drip line of the trees. But in downtown areas where there's a grate or there's a 5x5 well that a tree is planted in, we now have accommodation for that in the planting code. So that's just common sense. In 1033-3 and corridors defined, we've added a definition of local roads because we start to include local roads in the landscape buffer requirement. So that's in this section right here. Essentially, it's everything that's not a collector, interstate, gateway, or highway, or an arterial. In 1033-4A4, we've added a new matrix here. that really is a little bit easier to follow in terms of what the landscape buffer requirements are, and also that this is required for multifamily development in a BC zone or in a mixed-use development. So all of these here are kind of follow the code, but we have added a requirement that multifamily have buffers against local roads, a 15-foot buffer, and that we've included institutional, which wasn't included before. So that's hospitals, churches, things like that also need to have a landscape buffer on the property. In terms of commercial or industrial, we've added a local road requirement here. And there's a caveat to that, and there's a, where is that star? Except in the downtown zone. So the commercial, except in the downtown zones, which have a 0-foot setback on local roads, no landscape buffer is required. So that's just something to note on there. Yeah, 1033 4A4. Oh, I've already passed that. 1033 4A8. So this talks about landscape buffer development in terms of the trees. And right now our code says that you have to line up the trees 25 feet apart. And that just doesn't make a lot of sense. There's a lot of developments where they want to cluster trees, or they want to showcase a building or something like that. So just to line up trees is kind of elementary. And so what we've done here is required that the trees be in a linear fashion, 50% of the buffer, and that the remainder of the 50% can be placed in a cluster fashion or wherever they want to place them on the site. And then we just indicated the spacing that's required for each of the classifications of trees and the size of the root ball. Also note that evergreen trees don't count as street trees, and we've also noted that here. In A9, we've added a new ground cover section. And the reason we added this is that, again, we're getting a lot of developments where they're just all rock and a few shrubs, or there's some grass and then mostly rock. And so what we've defined here is a little bit more detail about the type of ground cover that we're looking for. In that turf should cover 50% of the total landscape buffer area. But per approval by the planning director, 25% of that turf can be replaced by a low-growing evergreen ground cover that will achieve 100% coverage in 3 years. So that allows us to pare back a little bit on how much turf we're putting in these landscape buffers. And so these other portions of this matrix kind of refer back to that a little bit and what needs to go in the ground. Areas that do have mulch and rock, no more than 50% of that can be that decorative rock mulch and shrubs. And that's it for the primary policy changes in this code.